Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never thought the word closure could sound so smug. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet, ordinary. One of those nights where routine fills the air instead of love. We were having dinner. Grilled salmon, her favorite. She'd been on her phone the whole time, half listening, half smiling at whatever popped up on the screen. Then, casually, almost playfully, she looked up and said, "My ex just texted. He wants to meet for closure tomorrow." And she smirked. Not nervous, not guilty, just amused. I stared at her for a second. Not long enough to start a fight, but long enough for her to notice the quiet change in my face. Then I nodded once and said, "Okay." That was it. One word. She blinked, maybe expecting a reaction. Anger, jealousy, something. But when it didn't come, she went back to her phone like it was no big deal. Inside, though, something clicked. Not broke. Clicked. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder, like realization settling in, the kind that doesn't shout. The kind that simply whispers. "You've been done for a while now, haven't you?" We'd been together 6 years. Married for 2. And somewhere between the wedding photos and the nightly scrolling sessions, she stopped seeing me. I used to think it was my fault. Maybe I worked too much, maybe I stopped being romantic enough. But over time, I realized she didn't want romance. She wanted attention from anyone who gave it freely. And I wasn't in that category anymore. That night, after dinner, she went to the bedroom, still smiling at her phone. I stayed at the table. The plates were still warm. I watched the condensation trail down my glass and thought about how many times we'd sat in that same spot, pretending to be happy. There's a difference between loving someone and being addicted to the idea of them. She loved the version of us that existed in public dinners, vacations, cute posts. But behind closed doors, we were strangers in polite conversation. When she came out later, she was wearing that casual tone again, the one people use when they're trying to test you. "You're really okay with it?" she asked, tilting her head, like she couldn't quite believe I didn't explode. I looked up from the TV and said, "You don't need my permission for closure." Her smile faltered for just a second. That's when I knew she wasn't really asking for permission. She was asking for validation. She wanted me to fight for her, to prove I still cared enough to be jealous. But here's the thing, you don't fight for someone who's already halfway out the door. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was imagining them together, but because I was replaying the last few months. The subtle disrespect, the quiet withdrawal, the cold affection that felt like an obligation. The strange how people announce the end of love long before they admit it. They do it through sighs, through distracted glances, through 1,000 little moments where presence turns into absence. I remembered the first time she mentioned her ex, months ago. "We ended on bad terms," she'd said. "So sometimes I wonder what I'd say if I ever saw him again." At the time, I brushed it off. Everyone has a past. But looking back, I realized she'd been building up that narrative for a while, planting the seed of justification, one what if at a time. The next morning, she dressed nicer than usual. Light makeup, new perfume. That blue blouse she hadn't worn in months. She said she'd be out for coffee. Same as if it were nothing. I just nodded again. She hesitated at the door. Maybe she wanted me to stop her. Maybe she wanted a reaction, a plea, a scene. But I didn't give her one. Because once someone tells you they need closure with their past, what they're really saying is they're reopening it. That day felt endless. I went to work, sat through meetings, smiled when needed. But inside I was already gone. Not from her physically, but emotionally, completely detached. When I came home that evening, she was there. Quiet, calm. Her phone face down on the table. A candle burning next to an untouched dinner. She looked at me like she was waiting for a question. But I didn't ask one. Instead, I walked past her, into the kitchen, poured myself a drink and said, "So, closure went well?" She didn't answer, just stared, like the word suddenly meant something different now that I'd said it. I waited. She shifted, finally, and let out a soft laugh. The kind that wasn't amused, just nervous. It was fine, she said. We talked. Closed old wounds. Nothing more. I nodded again. One word like I had all week. Inside, though, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not relief exactly, but clarity. Because here's the truth. The meeting wasn't about him. It was about her. About proving something to herself, to me, maybe even to him, that she was still desirable, still in control of her story. And I realized something else. I didn't need to be part of that story anymore. Over the next few days, things changed subtly but unmistakably. She was distant, yes, but not resentful. I was calm, collected, and disconnected in a way that puzzled her. At first, she tried to pull me back into the drama. I just don't understand why you're fine with it, she said one evening. I looked at her, not with anger, not with sarcasm, just steady clarity. Because it's not about me. It's never been about me. And it never will be. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she walked away. And for the first time in months, I didn't chase her. I spent that weekend alone, not lonely, but deliberately present with myself. I went for a long run along the river, listened to music I hadn't touched in years, and cooked a proper breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee exactly how I liked it. The small moments reminded me of a truth I'd been ignoring. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. It just quietly exists. She noticed. That Monday evening, she came home, tried again, casual conversation, an attempt at connection. So, how was your weekend? I smiled politely, shrugged. Good. Peaceful. Yours. She hesitated, then mumbled something non-committal. And that was okay. Because the story wasn't about winning her back. It was about not losing myself in the attempt. Over the next week, I started noticing other patterns I'd ignored before. The subtle manipulations, the moments where her words were sharper than needed, the silent tests to see if I would react. And every time I didn't, I nodded. I listened. I kept my boundaries. And boundaries, I realized, are far more powerful than drama. Then came the real test. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she was meeting a friend later. Just catching up, nothing serious. I nodded. Sure. Have a good time. Inside, a part of me wanted to spiral, jealousy, doubt, old hurt. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. Because freedom isn't about controlling someone else. It's about controlling your response to them. It's about reclaiming the part of yourself that stayed loyal even when loyalty wasn't returned. That night, I sat alone on the balcony with a glass of wine. The city lights twinkled, the hum of distant traffic like a lullaby for someone finally awake. I thought about her, about him, about closure, about the subtle games people play with each other's hearts. And I realized I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need explanations, apologies, or validation. What I needed was clarity, the kind that comes from stepping back, seeing the truth, and respecting yourself enough to walk through it unshaken. Weeks passed. She grew quieter, a little more careful with words, a little more polite. I continued my life, work, friends, hobbies, routines, everything I'd neglected while trying to anticipate her moods, her desires, her whims. One evening, she paused before leaving for work, looked at me with something like hesitation, and said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I smiled gently, not triumphantly, not smugly, just gently. You didn't. I let you. And that was it. No grand confrontation, no dramatic scene, no shouting or tears. Just the quiet knowledge that I had regained myself. Sometimes, life gives you moments that feel like small betrayals. A text, a smirk, a casual remark that cuts deeper than 1,000 arguments. But those moments aren't really about the other person. They're about you, your response, your boundaries, your choice to protect your peace. And in that choice, in that stillness, I found something I hadn't realized I'd lost. The ability to be untouchable, not in arrogance, but in quiet dignity. So the next time she mentions him, the next time someone tries to test my patience or my loyalty, I'll nod, I'll smile, and I'll remember that closure isn't about confrontation. It's about knowing your worth, standing firm, and letting the rest fall where it may. Because the story isn't theirs. It's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I like the ending.